Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm Kathleen McCartney, Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's event, which is the 2013 Ann Rowe Lecture and Award Presentation. I want to tell you a little bit about Ann Rowe before I tell you about our speaker. But actually, before I even do any of that, because I'll forget if I don't tell you, after the event in Gutman Library, there's a conference room in the basement. It's the modern building across the street. We are having a reception. So I hope all of you will join us. There will be alcohol, so that's your incentive. So hope to see you all there. So now let me tell you a little bit about Ann Rowe. Ann Rowe was a researcher here who was deeply concerned with the development of women and women's careers. She was also the first woman tenured at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Would anyone like to guess what year that was? 1963, which is recent enough, isn't it? The Ann Rowe Award was created in her honor by the school in 1979. And this award honors an educator who has contributed significantly to women's professional development in education. Past recipients of the Ann Rowe Award include Gloria Steinem and also Geeta Rao Gupta. And I don't know if you are aware of who she is, but she's the former president of the International Center for Research on Women, and currently she is the deputy executive director for UNICEF. And we think very highly of her work, as we do of tonight's recipient. This year, the selection committee chose the president and founder of the Posse Foundation, Deborah Bial, an HGSE alum, to receive this award. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Debbie, although I know many of you are here because you're well aware of her amazing work. She's a 1987 graduate of Brandeis University, and she was working in New York City public schools when she was inspired by a conversation she had with a young man from a disadvantaged background. He was a student of great promise, but he had left college after only 6 months, despite the fact that he had a scholarship. He told Deborah, "I never would have dropped out of college if I had had my posse with me." And from this interaction, the Posse Foundation was born. The simple and powerful idea of sending groups of students to college together as a designated support group for one another. Vanderbilt University was the first Posse partner institution. They admitted 5 students from New York City in 1989, and 4 years later, all 5 members of Posse 1 graduated with various honors and accolades. Today, Posse is one of the most comprehensive college access and leadership development programs in the United States. Posse has 4,237 scholars in top-tier colleges and universities throughout the country. 60% of Posse scholars are women, 80% are Black or Latino, 75% come from families with high need. Nationally, Posse scholars have earned $486 million in scholarship from Posse peer organizations. And 90% of Posse scholars graduate, a rate significantly among the national average. With the success of Posse, Deborah Bial has become one of the nation's premier education strategists. She plays an influential role in public discourse on equity and access in higher education. She has received numerous honors. In 2007, Deborah was awarded the MacArthur Fellowship for her work on Posse. In March 2010, the Posse Foundation became one of only 10 organizations selected by President Obama to receive a portion of his Nobel Peace Prize award money. You might remember he gave all of the money to charity. And in June 2012, Deborah received an honorary degree from her alma mater, Brandeis University, which I know meant a lot to her. In awarding her the honorary degree, President Frederick Lawrence praised her by saying, "There is simply no better example of social justice in action than Debbie Bial." I couldn't agree more. The title of her talk this evening is Protecting Opportunity in America, the Risk of Doing Nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Deborah Bial.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And look, there's a lot of water up here, just in case. Hi, thank you for coming. It's really nice of you. Hi, Garrett. Jeff. There's a lot of people here that I know, and I'm really happy to see you. And for those of you who I don't know, I appreciate your listening. And I'm going to read my speech. But I just wanted to take a moment and say that this is a really big honor for me. And it's an especially big honor because Dean McCartney is giving it to me, is presenting it to me. In her last few months at the Ed School as dean, where she has done a tremendous job. Obviously, the school has been transformed physically, and it looks beautiful. Even the elevators work better than when I was here. But also more substantively, and I wanted to point to one program especially that I am impressed with, and that is your commitment to the ED-LD program, which is the first new doctoral program at Harvard in 75 years. Is that correct? And I just wanted to give her a round of applause for Smith College is lucky to get her. So, you ready? Everybody mentions, it's in all the literature, that this award has gone to people like Marian Wright Edelman and Gloria Steinem. And that's kind of overwhelming for me because these are two women that I very much admire. I can't see this. I'm gonna have to do this from memory. But their willingness to speak up and speak out in public, is what differentiates leaders from the rest of us. And why do you think that's so pleasing? To hear someone else say something you were thinking, but would never say out loud. We are afraid, aren't we? We're afraid to say what we really think out loud. It's not so hard to talk to our partners or to our families about what we really think, but when we move outside that comfortable, familiar circle, it gets harder, so we keep our mouths shut. But at what cost? The title of this talk, as you all know, is Protecting Opportunity in America, the Risk of Doing Nothing. And I hope that I do an okay job of making the case that critical leadership is what we need if we're going to protect the very freedoms that we fought so hard to achieve over the past decades. So think about the United States. It's celebrated as a land of opportunity. But over the decades, for so many groups, that opportunity has been hard won. The labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, all offered the less advantaged a chance to right the scales. These social movements were built on bravery and determination, with pioneering leaders who stood up for unpopular views, and they were unpopular, we forget that. We think the whole nation wanted the civil rights movement, but they didn't. The majority of Americans were not behind it, and it took leaders like Martin Luther King to make sure that people understood that this was what had to happen. Today, as Americans, we face a new set of struggles, but our sense of urgency is not commensurate with our society's needs or with the demands of fairness and justice, in my opinion. And I'm talking tonight about leadership. It sounds nice, right? Leadership, we have leadership programs and leadership awards, and we talk about leaders of companies and schools and all of that. But tonight, I want to talk about capital letter leadership. Gloria Steinem, Marian Wright Edelman. And I'm suggesting that in this country, this kind of leadership is a scarce resource. Without it, I think we're going to lose what we fought so hard to achieve. Just take a minute right now, do me a favor, and think about the one or two most impressive and current leaders today in this country who are taking a risk, who are really brave, who are standing up for something, moving the rest of us to act. You got it? You got those people? Yeah, it's hard. I think it's really hard. I mean, it's really hard. But there used to be a lot of these leaders. In the civil rights movement alone, there was Martin Luther King, but there was also John Lewis and Harry Belafonte and Thurgood Marshall and A. Philip Randolph. Out of the civil rights movement came the feminist movement. And we had Gloria Steinem and Ruth Ginsburg and Betty Friedan. Marion Wright Edelman, of course, was this pioneering woman who founded the Children's Defense Fund to defend kids. But today, few if any names are on the tips of our tongues. We can't readily identify today's leaders, the ones we so desperately need, and we do need them. Let's talk about sequestration. Last Friday, vast spending cuts went into effect that would hurt millions of Americans. How is it possible that we allowed this self-imposed punishment to be a tool in our government negotiations? How could we risk the programs, the jobs, the services that so many families depend on, that men and women of our military rely on, for the chance that one side would give in to the other? Let's talk about being poor in this country. Almost 50 million people in the United States are living in poverty. Another 50 million are living in what we call near poverty. That's almost a third of the American population. Why is this not a front-page story every day? Where is the cry from the politicians who've been elected to support their constituent groups? It's a travesty, I think, for this country, this land of opportunity, that so many are suffering, literally having a hard time putting food on the table, and we're not talking about it. Let's talk about jobs. Jobs. Jobs are scarce. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he used to work in corporate HR. And he said he's been looking for a job for 7 months. He can't find one, and he has had to sell his home, and he's renting a one-bedroom apartment, and he's in his 40s. And I don't know if you saw this, but there was a recent Rutgers study that showed that young people who graduated from college in just 2006, bear with me on this, are employed in full-time jobs at only, shockingly, a little over 50%. The ones that they're taking, by the way, the jobs, they're taking jobs that used to be filled by kids with a high school degree. And think about what's happening with those kids. Let's talk about education. Am I getting you depressed? A little bit. I think we've lost our way. What happened to the wonderful idea that public school would be the cornerstone of a United States meritocracy, that every child would have a chance to receive a solid education, putting all children on equal footing, creating a chance for every one of them to reach their potential? Where are we with this? We're mired in debates, charters or traditional publics, testing, tracking, need-blind, need-based, teachers as villains, as scapegoats, as sacred cows, and college. Without a college degree, you have little chance of finding a job in this country that can support a family. Yet 70% of all Americans do not have a four-year degree. And of the more than 1,400 four-year colleges and universities, those at the top, the most selective, say the top 10%, the elite, they don't reflect the changing US demographics. They're not even close. And they're still graduating a mostly white student body, and one that comes from the top economic quartile, by the way. What this means is that they will continue to help perpetuate a racially divided society where only a homogeneous elite, only a few, will have access to the best and highest paying jobs. Unacceptable. And if we reverse affirmative action, we will fall farther and farther behind as a nation by ignoring the fact that we've not yet created an equal playing field. And that's about to happen. The point is, if we freeze people out of opportunities that would allow them to flourish, our society overall cannot benefit from the great diversity that we have in this country, and from the ideas that come from that, from the innovation, from the creativity. If you're thinking things are better today than they were, I want you to consider these statistics. Of the Fortune 500 CEOs, of the Fortune 500 CEOs, 6 are Black, 6 are Latino, 9 are Asian, and 21 are women. And there's overlap. But when you look at Section 16 executives in these companies, that's the top 10 to 15 executives at the Fortune 500 companies, you might think, well, okay, maybe diversity is better there. But in fact, 91% of these executives are white, and only 17% are women. So, let's talk about race. The idea that this country is post-racial, right? We have a Black president. The idea that we're done with issues of race, that we've solved that problem, it's not only wrong, it's damaging. Last week, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia made an inflammatory comment during the hearings of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Did you all see what he said? Okay, I'm going to read it just to remind everybody. He said, quote, "I don't think Congress's renewal of the law is attributable to the fact that it is so much clearer now that we need this. I think it is attributable, very likely attributable, to a phenomenon that is called perpetuation of racial entitlement." He said, whenever a society adopts racial entitlements, it is very difficult to get out of them through the normal political process. What did he mean by racial entitlements? Voting? I'd like to repeat what Congressman John Lewis said in response, in reaction to that. You know, John Lewis, one of this country's most important leaders, and a real true hero from the civil rights movement. He said, quote, "It is an affront to all of what the civil rights movement stood for, what people died for, what people bled for, and those of us who marched across that bridge 48 years ago, we didn't march for some racial entitlement. We wanted to open up the political process and let all of the people come in, and it didn't matter whether they were Black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American," end quote. Entitlements. It's become an inflammatory word itself. What are entitlements? The American dream was the idea that life could be richer and fuller for everyone, right? That people, regardless of race or circumstance of birth, could work to achieve their potential and know that they could find a good job, support a family, own a home, right? The American dream was directly connected to the country's identity as a land of opportunity, and this set of ideals helped define American entitlements. The guarantee, entitlements, the guarantee that we'd have access to benefits based on a shared value of establishing a country of social equity. It's good, makes sense. But where are we now? Are we or are we not entitled to a good education, to a stable economy, to a reasonable chance at finding work and establishing a home for our families? Entitlements like Social Security and Medicare are programs that have largely eliminated poverty among the elderly and extended life expectancy. But maybe these things are too much to ask. Those who challenge these things say that we're creating a society of laziness and that we're just making people depend on the government for handouts and that we should cut back on entitlements. Well, there is plenty of controversy and little agreement. Plenty of rage, but no one uniting us for a productive cause. Technology has provided an outlet, but also a hiding place, a way to speak but still be anonymous. Is there really public outrage, or is there only the rage we feel able to express in private? It seems to me that we long for others to fix our problems for us, that we just cross our fingers and hope things go in the right direction. We've been longing and hoping and crossing our fingers for too long, and we are at risk of losing the very ideals, the very foundation of what makes this country so special. So who will stand up now? There are attacks launched on our freedoms all the time. They're launched on the rights Americans have fought hard to put in place. And this is a time where even words that were once used to unite and inspire and define have been turned against themselves. For example, when did the word liberal become a dirty word? And how did the word feminist become associated with ugliness and extremism? When I was growing up, both my parents, my mother and my father, identified as feminists. They still do. We use the idea of people's rights against the very notion of people's rights. Who wouldn't think the right to work sounded like it supported workers? This lingo has successfully confused many workers. And by the way, today, enrollment in unions is at a 97-year low. Gloria Steinem is one of the most important voices of the women's lib movement. That movement inspired millions of women and men to think differently about what was okay. The norms of the 1950s have definitely changed. Women are now seen, of course, as we were just saying, in every industry and have taken on every kind of career. But still last year, women made, guess how much on the dollar that every man made? 77 cents. Why? It doesn't make sense at all to me. And remember, of the Fortune 500 companies, how many are women? 21. So we see misogyny creeping back, in my opinion. It's creeping back through the music we listen to, the restaurants we go to, the media we support. Some think we're slipping backwards. I think we're slipping backwards. Marian Wright Edelman, who has said, quote, "If you don't like the way the world is, you have an obligation to change it," end quote, decided to become a spokesperson for children, for 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, for 7-year-olds and 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds. They have a spokesperson. How great is that? So she cares about fighting for them when we think about foster care and adoption and health care, about school. She's saying, think about it from the perspective of the children. We had never done that before. But where are the Gloria Steinems and the Marian Wright Edelmans? Where are the leaders, the young, passionate, militant leaders on the verge of changing the world? Are they waiting in the wings? I actually think they are. I'm going to give you some examples. In 1955, 9 months before Rosa Parks captured headlines in Montgomery, Alabama, a 15-year-old high school student named Claudette Colvin set the stage by getting arrested after refusing to give up her seat on a city bus. Did you know that? In 1964, freedom fighters, James Chaney, who was 21, Andrew Goodman, who was 20, and Michael Schwerner, who was 24, they were just trying to register black voters. But they were murdered in Mississippi by the Ku Klux Klan. But their bravery stands today as a reminder of their heroism. They were fighting for something they really thought was right. I have to believe that under the right circumstances, ordinary people can rise to extraordinary heights. Where is America's Malala? You know Malala, the teenage girl from Pakistan who was shot in the head by the Taliban? She was shot because she was pursuing an education. And so in retaliation for her refusal to stop going to school, they shot her in the head. But today, she's fighting. She's fighting for women. She's fighting for their right to an education. And she's a leader. But does Malala possess a special constitution that allows for us such extraordinary courage? Perhaps, but I doubt it. I don't think these or any other special gifts explain these people's heroism. Instead, I like to think that they each have a profound sense of their own agency, a sense that how they respond to the world's deepest challenges can make a difference. And it's really a question of what we do to nurture those leaders so they have the opportunity to become the change makers that we need. I believe that these young potential leaders are all around us. Posse, the Posse Foundation, exists solely to identify and support and nurture these leaders. I'm going to give you some Posse examples. Just so you know that they're out there, I'm going to get a little bit of hope. In 1990, a group of Posse scholars in college, they were coming home from a party at night at 2 a.m. in the morning. And they saw some students in the dark of night running from tree to tree, tacking up flyers. The Posse members went up to them and asked what they were doing. They said, well, they were LGBT students and felt they couldn't show themselves during the day. The Posse scholars took the flyers from them and the next day went around campus tacking up the flyers. Allies. The tradition at Vanderbilt University in Nashville every year at the homecoming game is for the chancellor of the university to walk out to the 50-yard line at halftime with the newly elected student government president. Together, they present a bouquet of flowers to the also newly elected homecoming queen. Many of you know that institution, Vanderbilt. It's very historically very white, very Southern, very wealthy. The women still wear dresses to the football game. That year, Chancellor Wyatt walked out to the 50-yard line with the president of the Student Government Association, an African-American Posse scholar from Brooklyn, to present a bouquet of flowers to the homecoming queen, an African-American Posse scholar from Staten Island. It was a moment, and one that was set to thousands of cheering students and alumni. Another day, Jamal Nelson woke up to find a drawing of himself hanging from a noose. It was tacked to his dorm room door, and he was running for school president. What did he do? What would you do? He happened to be a residential advisor of the dorm, and he called a meeting. He wanted the dorm residents to talk about the person who drew the picture, and he wanted that person to reveal himself. Whoa. They did. They talked about it, and he did. He revealed himself. Amazing. Jamal was elected president, the second black president ever to be elected at that school. You know who the first one was? Keto Huggins, the Posse student that I mentioned in the first story. These are just a few examples from one program, just from our initiative, from Posse, that's trying to help develop kids so they can one day maybe be the capital letter leaders that we need. But all of these stories remind us that leadership is not the preserve of the established or the wealthy or the powerful, that it comes from every corner of the world and from places we might not expect. Today's struggles still cry out for leaders of courage and conviction, leaders who are willing to take the baton and finish the race. Whether it's jobs or women's rights or civil rights or children's rights, we need these leaders. Without them, we are in danger of reverting to the way we were even before Dr. King, before Gloria Steinem, and before Marian Wright Edelman. And at some point along the way, we have forgotten our agency. We've forgotten that we can do something about the things we care about. Somehow this feeling has been replaced with the fear or the excuse that I'm just one vote. Well, my voice means nothing. I am only one person. If we allow ourselves to be convinced that speaking up or speaking out is futile, we risk losing our voice altogether. I'm not kidding. So we risk becoming a failed society. But when we fight for fairness and change and equality in our successes and even in our setbacks, we take our place in a vital American tradition. When we stand up for the rights of all people, we move that much closer to the society we aspire to be. We need big capital letter leaders to stand as our new guard, ready to meet the challenges at our door. But where are they? They're right here. If you ever took a stand during an argument at a dinner table, or fought for a friend, or marched, or fought for a cause, I'd like you to consider yourself a prospect. Sometimes along the way, we forget the power of our individual voices to affect change, to rally our neighbors. We forget that our individual acts of courage can inspire hope and even galvanize movements. We have been duped into believing that the problems are too massive and complex for a single individual to be of much significance. But this, I tell you, is not true. We are the leaders we're waiting for. You, me, everyone in this room has a part to play. We need to re-accept the idea that we ourselves can be the change, and together we can organize, we can mobilize, we can actualize change by doing something. And alongside that, we have a responsibility, an obligation to look out for the young people who will inherit everything. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision. They exist in every neighborhood, in every community, in every city. The leaders that we need will come from places that may surprise you. From the Bronx, from Grinnell, Iowa, from Chicago South Side, from Cambridge. That they can be you. Why not? We need to take a lesson from the Rosas and the Malalas of the world. We must remember our own power and press forward towards our highest ideals. This is our tradition. It's our collective heritage. It's time we reclaim it. Our identity as a nation hangs in the balance. Thank you. So, do you want to talk? Because we have time and we can talk about anything, the speech or posse or anything that you want to raise. A lot of people in this room are women, I'm noticing. That's nice too. Anything you want to say? Comment, questions? Okay.
Hi, I'm Frances McLaughlin from Education Pioneers.
Oh, yeah.
How are you all thinking about Posse's work as looking ahead? Maybe it's decades, but when maybe not as many kids will be actually going to college. We joke with my daughter that she may be going to Stanford in her bedroom upstairs, you know? And have you guys started to think about what that will mean?
It's a great question because we don't know what's going to happen, right? We don't know how we're going to be able to afford to continue the higher education system that we currently have in place. And, you know, the truth is that we not only have problems with a lot of our colleges providing the kind of education and skill building that we need, but there's this very small number of what we call the elite schools that everybody's fighting to get into as well. We have a lot of other problems related to that. So the idea that you could provide supplemental strategies for getting that degree is not a bad idea, but we don't know how it's going to work. Probably Kathy could answer that better than I could. She's like, go to the, talk about it. I'd love to talk about Posse more. Posse started because of one student that Kathy mentioned who had dropped out of college. This was a really smart kid, and it connects to this speech. This kid his real name was Lamont, he was from the Bronx, but he was so smart that he had a nickname, Stein, short for Einstein. And he got a scholarship to go to an Ivy League institution, and we were so proud of him. I remember him really well. And 6 months later, he was home. He dropped out. And he's the one who said, you know, I never would have dropped out if I had my posse with me. And posse was more of a hip word in the 80s than it is now. But it made sense. It meant group of friends, people who backed me up. And why not send a team of students together to college? I don't know if you heard, but I mentioned we are still very, very homogeneous at our elite institutions of higher education, at many of them. And so if you come from a big urban public school system, if you're a person of color or underrepresented in some other way, and you go to this very homogeneous institution, it's culture shock for all of us, but there's even more culture shock. So the idea that you'd have a team was a great idea, and we started with Vanderbilt University. They took a risk on this idea, and it worked. And since 1989, we've sent 5,000 kids to college, and they've won $500 million in scholarships. They're persisting in graduating at a rate of 90%, and they're going out to become leaders. Remember that story about the kids taking the flyers and putting them on, for the gay and lesbian students? One of the women in that group went on to get her doctorate in clinical psychology at Duke University, and she's now the dean of the college at Middlebury. She's this Dominican kid from Brooklyn whose dad drove a taxi and never would have gotten into Vanderbilt in a million years. And she's the dean of the college at Middlebury. Isn't that cool? I know. So I can talk more about how the program works. It's an unusual selection process. We look at non-traditional factors. Sometimes people call them non-cognitive traits, but things like leadership, things like the ability to stand up for something you believe in front of people even when it's scary. We're actually looking for that. And we find these amazing kids. But do you know what? In this country, people believe in those kids. We're in 9 cities. We had 15,000 nominations for 640 slots. What does that say to you? We're not serving them. We're not serving them. I just saw Irv Epstein. If you could wave, he's over there. He's a chemist at Brandeis University, used to be their provost, and he has done so much with Posse at Brandeis. Not only do we have 2 posses at Brandeis, but it was his idea to create a science, technology, engineering, and math posse. What a great idea. So now we have STEM posses, not only at Brandeis, but all over going to different schools. But we need more colleges to sign on. We need them. This country needs to do more than it's doing, much more. Go ahead. You go, and then you.
I was wondering, I'm particularly interested in K12 education. I went to Carleton College, which has a strong
Posse school, yeah.
presence. And so I know about the fantastic work that Posse has done at the upper levels. But I was wondering, do you see any policy implications for what we're doing in K12? Anything that K12 can do to make it easier on groups like Posse, or to make it more?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there is a lot we can do. I feel like we need to put pressure on the people who make decisions. So what's the single most important criteria for getting into a elite school? Yeah, why is that still? Even the college board will tell you it shouldn't be the determining factor, it should be a factor. And it's fine to have it as a factor. But if you get a terrible SAT score, you're basically shut out of opportunity from those institutions. And Posse's one way of trying to persuade them to think differently and be more holistic and expand the way they consider applicants. But K through 12 should be putting pressure on them too, right? Because you have these talented, amazing kids, and not everyone is a good test taker. Whether that's the issue or something else, I think we should mobilize. I think, for example, that college and university presidents who do care a lot about these issues, they should band together. Why aren't they writing a joint op-ed letter to the New York Times? They should be, right? They should be. K through 12 should be doing similar kinds of things. I also think, and this might be controversial, that we spend too much time in K through 12 picking our favorite project. Hedge fund guys pick the charter school that they like to support because it gives them ownership over something cool, a project that they can say they own. That's not necessarily great. I think that we should be figuring out ways to recognize what we know works, and there's a lot of stuff that works. And then we should put pressure on the people who make decisions to replicate it so that all kids can experience it. I don't think it's rocket science. I know I'm being a little simplistic, but that's kind of what I think. Okay, you were going to ask them?
Hi, my name is Estelle Archibald, and my question is really pointed toward your story. I think we're empowered by the stories that you told about the students and parts of their journey, and I've read parts of your story. I'm wondering, what would you share with us about your experiences that led you to feel empowered to do this work at the level that you're doing it now?
Yeah. Think team, think Posse, right? You know, I get to be the president of the Posse Foundation, but it's not my foundation at all. So Jeff Ubben is sitting in the front row. He's the chairman of the board of the Posse Foundation. Garrett Moran is sitting over there. He's actually going to school here right now, but he's on the board of the Posse Foundation. And I honestly believe without the Posse Foundation board, there would be no Posse Foundation, right? Without the amazing staff. I'm not just saying that. I really think you need to surround yourself with people that you think can be part of your team and then make it happen. Posse was an idea. It was just a good idea, but Terry Deal, does anybody, if there's any students here who have studied human and organizational development, he's the superstar, Terry Deal, right? He was a professor at Vanderbilt. He's the one who got the program there. He's the one who said, let's try it. They took a risk on a program with no track record, and it worked. We have to take risks. We have to step outside what's comfortable. I know you guys have all done stuff like that.
First of all, thank you for coming out here and admire your work for the last 2 decades. Can you describe the selection process? You mentioned that briefly.
Yeah. Does this thing work too? I like to walk around. Yeah? Okay. So we have something called the dynamic assessment process, and you can hear me still, right? And I want you to imagine what happens, right? When you take a test, when you take the SAT or the ACT or a test, you're sitting by yourself at a desk, paper and pencil. Basically, that's the idea, right? When you write an essay, you write it, maybe you get some help, right? But you write it by yourself. You write your essay. You fill out the application. It's a very solitary experience. What are you missing? Here's what you're missing. This is where the idea came from in the beginning. We took 2 kids from the Bronx, hypothetically. They're both Puerto Rican. They both got 1,100 on their SAT combined. They both had a 3.4 GPA. They both go to Middlebury College. One of them drops out and one of them doesn't. What's the difference? What do you think? Support network? Maybe. Maybe one found that. What? Money, somebody said? There's this intangible stuff. The kid who had grit, we hear that word used a lot. The kid who was motivated, the kid who was, well, how would you evaluate that? So we said, we're going to figure that out. We're going to evaluate that. And so what we do is we get 15,000 nominations, and in groups of 100, we bring them into a big room with no chairs, and we have evaluators. And we break them up into these small groups where they're building robots out of Legos in 10 minutes. And they're running a discussion on genetic testing with their peers. Or they're presenting a public service announcement on education and public schools. And what are we looking for? Leadership, initiative, ability to work well in a team. We're looking for the kid who knows how to rally her peers. We're looking for the young person who's motivated, ambitious, and just wants it. Because we think that can tip the scale. We think that information is as valuable as a test score. That's how we screen them initially. That's the beginning. And then we do individual interviews and finalist meetings and all that stuff, and then 10 kids get into a school, and that's Posse. That's my short version of that. Yeah. Yeah. Could I ask you to speak to that, Irv? Would you mind? Because you have an interesting perspective. Why is Brandeis willing to take kids who might not have these, more traditional, proven criteria in their application? Here, you need a mic. You got it. Here, I'll take this to you.
Well, I'm a little hesitant to speak. I feel a little bit actually like some of the students of color in my pre-science Posse introductory chemistry class, because I'm in a very small minority, and so I'm hesitant to get up and speak.
Is there a guy?
Yeah, exactly. But, I will say, when the idea of Posse came to Brandeis, the Dean of Admissions came to me and said, we have this alumna who's doing this really exciting stuff. And he told me the story about the homecoming queen and student body president at Vanderbilt. And that didn't do it, because the first thing in my cynical provost style I said was, well, we have plenty of student politicians, and we don't have homecoming. We don't even have football. But I then said, but we do have a rather homogeneous student body. And if there is a way of identifying the students, I think the term that we tend to use is resilience. With that quality, maybe I can sell this to the president. Because having taught these introductory science courses in particular, the students, this is a vast overstatement, but it's a little boring. And it was clear that we are neglecting a huge portion of our human resources in this country. And so the idea, it was clear that SAT scores, while they predict some stuff, particularly test-taking skill, which carries over into college, they don't predict a lot of other things. And I think we were just intrigued by the notion that it was possible to identify with some predictive value, and at that point there was a track record for Posse, that it was possible to do as well in predicting those skills as SAT scores do for test-taking skills. And so with a little bit of discussion, we were able to convince the president that it was worth taking a chance. And initially it was, well, we'll try it for a year or two and see how it goes. But once the students appeared, it was so clear that this was the right thing to do and that it was working, that it just grew and grew. And it's grown, as you've noted, across the country. So I think it's, as you say, you've got to get over that initial barrier to try something that you're not sure is going to work. And then the issue, of course, is can we scale it up? And that's something we're still tackling.
Did that answer your question enough? I can't remember. I know, me too. Jeez, Louise. That's what Jeff always says. You can't get them to taste the Kool-Aid because it's a whole program. Toothpaste. Toothpaste. Yeah.
Actually, that raises makes me think of a question I've been bubbling about here as I've been sitting listening to everybody else. We've been talking about the schools that are willing to risk, the schools that are willing to take the chance, the success that comes with that, both for the communities that these students attend and for themselves individually. I'm curious if there are pockets that actively resist what you're trying to do. Because surely we see that kind of behavior on a national level every day.
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't be that politic to talk about it, but there are resistors who think we shouldn't compromise standards for diversity. That's something I hear a lot. Yeah, Bill is saying, is that a mask for something else? Yeah, do you want to?
Well, I think it's, so it's kind of bullshit, right? It's a little bit what like Scalia was saying. I mean, I have such a visceral reaction to that, and we deal with this in my own organization where I guess we're among friends. One of the challenges we had in our early years on our, I would still say it, then it's easier. But we were finding, we'd be looking at our recruitment data, and there would be members of our recruiting team who would talk about, well, do we want quality or diversity? And it's like, no, like this is not an or. Diversity is a fundamental aspect of the quality of our product. Like it's in our value statement, and you can buy it, but it's hard to do.
If you hear, there's another interesting thing about leadership, because it's this word that's vague, but if you really, really value what Posse scholars are bringing, or Posse type scholars are bringing to a campus, then you understand how worth it these scholarships are, how unbelievably worth it. But for some reason that gets questioned more than the star violinist or the great athlete. We know we need those. There's no debate about that. And if a superstar quarterback was going to come onto our campus, he has low test scores, that's okay. Why is that okay? Because he's valuable. We're not valuing this idea that we need to support a diverse student body in every one of our institutions of higher education. So yeah, we have kind of smoke and mirrors and all sorts of excuses. It's too expensive or whatever the reason is. It's a problem. We have to fight that. Yeah, go ahead. Everyone's raising their hand now for some reason. Okay.
I was curious, Johnny, I was curious about the workforce.
What happens after?
I mean, what role do workers or potential employers have in diversity and seeing this?
Yeah, see, it's everywhere. The pressure's got to be on. Who has ever interviewed or knows someone who interviewed at a law firm or at a big bank and they ask for your SAT scores? Only one person knows somebody where that happens all the time. All the time. Is that fair? But we do it. Unfair, unjust. Yeah, we do it though. Why are we doing that? Because we want the job. We got to put pressure. We're putting pressure on them. We have 150 corporate partners who are phenomenal, and they're working with us on that. But it's always a conversation. Someone else said, yeah.
Hi, I have actually, ooh, this is really loud. I have several friends that were actually Posse scholars, so I can vouch that this is an awesome program, and they rave about it all the time. Actually, one of them is here at HGSC. Cool. So my question is for you regarding Latino students. We've been seeing an increase of enrollment for Latino students, but most of those at community colleges. In the previous years, have you thought about building any relationships or partnerships with community colleges to improve outcomes for Latino youth?
No, because we're a very narrowly focused program. There's a lot of interesting work happening at community colleges, and for those of you that are interested in pursuing that, there's tremendous support from the government too for that, the federal level. But we are focused on working within a system that we think is unjust. So it's weird. So we want to work with the system and we want to fight against the system. So we're only focused on the elite institutions because who gets access to the best jobs in the United States, the ones that pay the most money? It's generally people who get degrees from the best institutions of higher education. And you know, it was really interesting. Garrett and I were in a business school class yesterday. Were any of you in that class? Yes, some of you. There you guys are. And remember, we asked the question, how many of you in this class went to an elite undergraduate institution? And the vast majority of students in that room raised their hand. So who's getting into Harvard? So that's why we're focused on those schools for now, for now.
I'll say something, but I'm from Kansas, so I can be the one that speaks for the middle of the country. That's really not true in Kansas City. If you look at the wealthiest people, they went to KU because that's where all the connections are, and they keep their money there. So I would suggest that it expand beyond the coast, because it's so often overlooked in cities like Chicago and other places that if you come to Kansas City, if you want a really good top-paying job at Sprint, at Garmin, at some really big corporations, going to the University of Kansas is a really good place to have gone. And I'm not kidding about it. I know it seems silly and nobody cares, but I think there's a lot of places that it doesn't have to be just that. Right. So I'm not saying your particular organization, but I don't know exactly how I could, do that same type of idea, right, in different communities, and keep people in your own communities, because that's where some of your connections and some of the great work could happen. It doesn't have to, you don't have to go away to be successful. You know what I mean?
But Susan, her point is really important. Is it only the elite institutions where you can go get the good job and make a lot of money and have access? No, totally not. And we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of really good colleges and universities in the United States. But we're just trying to focus on this one thing, this one small sliver of it, because we're trying to play the game that way. It sounds bad, but that's what we're trying to do. I think programs like this should be established all over the place. The cohort model, the financial support piece, the mentoring piece, the community piece, the discussion, the dialogue. Also, how are we defining diversity? There was a man that I once met who came into my office and he said, "Debbie, I was just in the most diverse high school I've ever been in my entire life. It was all black kids." But this country has that mistake in their head. They think that diversity is synonymous with minority or with black. It is not. And so Posse has white kids and Asian kids and Pakistani and Jewish and gay and straight and every kind of kid you can think of. We reflect the demographics of the schools from which we recruit. And what about this idea of at risk? We have programs that help at risk or poor or underprivileged or disadvantaged. What do you think that does? Yeah, and they're good programs, and we need those programs. We need need-based aid, and we need programs for fill in the blank. But Posse said we're going to be a strength-based model, but we're really going to be a strength-based model. We're not just going to use it as a cover for something else. So Posse is about finding kick-ass kids. And anyone who knows a Posse scholar will tell you they are amazing, right? It's not bullshit, to use your word, whatever. But it's real. Okay, it's you and then you.
Okay. Thank you for coming. I had a question about students who are undermatched to these elite colleges and universities, specifically students who are high achieving but still low income. And I know a number of studies show that these students often are attending less selective universities like community colleges, for example, as opposed to the more elite colleges and universities. I really appreciated your talk today about the role of leadership, and I'm wondering if you could talk about the role that leaders and external partners or nonprofits, and what role they can serve in helping these students who are undermatched gain access to more elite colleges and universities.
Right, or other colleges and universities like we were talking about. You know, I'm really glad that you just said what you said, because even that, Susan, it made so much sense what you said, but you were nervous to say it. And this is a friendly group. This is a group that agrees, with you or in general. We're just really afraid to say stuff. In one-on-one meetings that we have with our constituent groups, in parent meetings, in meetings when we meet with a company, we're so worried that we're going to say something that's different from what they normally think, and then they won't give us the money, or they won't give us what we want. They won't give us the jobs for the kids that we need. We can't be like that. You have to say what you think. That's the only advice that I can give. You have to stand behind what you believe in. And when you get brave enough, it kind of works. You say what you think, then everybody hears, and they can argue. It works. It's the only thing that you can do. Mobilizing is good too, but we don't always have time. were you gonna, yeah.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here. I've looked through your university, the list of
List.
university partners. Where are the Ivies? And you started off with a student that dropped out of an Ivy. Where are they? Why aren't they on the list? You have an amazing board, and all of these like superstar boards.
Yeah.
So where are the Ivies, and how, as the Ivies go, how can they be a part of changing that across the nation, so that it's not just a singular organization that's leading that, but asking people to really change the way that they're looking at what the best
Ivies helping to
future
make that
of
statement?
America is. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. We want the Ivies. Cornell just signed on, and we figured out a way to get the Ivies to work with us, because they only award need-based aid, and Posse's a merit program, so there are merit scholarships. But now there's a third party involved that allows Ivies to join. So it's brand new. This is Cornell's first year, and we're hoping that they all come on board, because we need them. Originally, and this is maybe more information than you need, Posse existed because there was such a discrepancy in SAT score between white and Asian kids and black and Latino kids. And I'll just give you an example. If you took the top 150 colleges in the United States today, and you asked the question, how many black kids would they need if they were going to have the same percentage of blacks in their student body that exists in the American population? And they would need about 50,000 black kids every year coming in there. So we said, okay, well, how many black kids, and we were really conservative, scored 1,200 on the math and verbal portions of the SAT or above? Anyone want to venture a guess? You probably know, some of you. Almost 7,000. And if we know that those elite schools rely heavily on test scores when they're making admissions decisions, we know that there's not nearly enough black kids scoring, top scores on the SAT, and they're not going to get admitted. So in the beginning, we knew that the Ivy Leagues were going to get all those kids, because everyone wants to go to Harvard, right? We want to go to Yale and Princeton. So we said, okay, but Vanderbilt and Middlebury and Bryn Mawr and all these other schools that are really, really great schools, kind of getting towards your point, you know what they were doing to try to lure the kid away from Harvard? They were throwing money at that kid. We'll give you a bigger scholarship. Or what can we do and I'm thinking, that's ridiculous. You're pulling at the arms and legs of this one kid with a high test score when there are hundreds of thousands of incredible young people in the United States who could excel at a Middlebury if you just gave them a chance. So in the beginning, we didn't even need the Ivies, because we existed you get what I'm saying. We existed to get these kids an opportunity at the other schools. But now we need the Ivies. We need them in the club, because now it's a movement, and we want to make a statement.
To that point, I think one of the reasons colleges fight over these high-achieving kids with high test scores is because of the perverse incentives that the U.S. News and World Report rankings. Yeah, what's to be done about that? I mean, Ms. President? Yeah, what's to be done? I know.
She's like, yeah, I know.
Yeah. Well, we will not tweet about this, but we've been wondering whether or not the Harvard Graduate School of Education could withdraw from those rankings, and in order, right? And what would that signal? I mean, I think it would signal something good, especially to call out. I don't know how many of you follow these rankings, but it's a hodgepodge of indicators that supposedly equals a #1 rank, and it's silly. And since I've been dean, we've been #1 and #6, and we didn't change in that time.
So interesting, right? What if the Ivies got together and withdrew from U.S. News and World Report rankings? What if somebody created a competitor to U.S. News and World Report rankings? Yankings, see? So foreign. There's a lot, yeah.
I don't know if anybody knows this, but Wake Forest in North Carolina, which is my home state, they, is that one of your groups? they no longer require SAT or ACT scores. And I wondered when that happened, who else would follow them. If they were going to lead that, I thought surely other schools will follow. And I don't know who else has, but it didn't seem to it didn't seem to generate the kind of movement that I thought it would. And then really my question, that was a comment. I wonder if you have thought about looking at secondary schools, high schools, and starting posse movements in those, particularly private schools, that are just as difficult to get into at times as some of the colleges and universities that you're talking about, and then you could start earlier with students rather than waiting until they're 18 and freshmen, on your campuses.
Yeah, why not? But remember, you guys can do this, right? No, you can, So, but yeah, there is one new initiative. Oh, okay, Garrett.
I'm the person she was talking about. I've been on the Posse board for 12 years. I went to Middlebury, and I'm close to a lot of the Posse kids in Middlebury. And one thing that I don't think you've said so far that I want to make sure everyone gets, the kids are academically excelling in usually they're crummy high schools. So they'll have high GPAs, but they'll have SATs that are 200 points below, for example, the Middlebury averages. And they come to Middlebury, that I'm the one I'm most familiar with, and they get GPAs that are below average in their first year, but by the junior year, they're average. So they're great kids who are academically strong, and they recover to the norms over time. But the thing that's hard to believe, frankly, is the leadership that these kids have. The impact they have on campus is like way beyond their numbers. It's amazing. It's not just getting Black and Latino kids who finish. It's the leadership that they bring to the campus is just extraordinary.
Thanks. I wanted to mention something because whose question was just about new ideas. Was that yours? Yeah. We rarely stray from our usual path because if you stay focused, you can get more done, in our opinion. But we got a phone call from Cappy Bond Hill last year. She's the president of Vassar. And she said, Debbie, we've been watching Posse for a long time, but we had an idea. Would you consider transferring the idea to U.S. veterans? Yeah, we thought, oh my God, that's a great idea, because there's almost 3 million veterans in the United States from Iraq and Afghanistan. And many of them have not gone to college. Those who do are graduating at under 20% from college. And imagine the average age of a veteran from Iraq and Afghanistan is 27 years old. So you're going to go to Vassar with a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds, and you can see why that might not really work. But if you went with a posse, how cool would that be? And it's almost a no-brainer because they're already with posses in the military, right? So they know what they're doing. They're more grown up. They're more advanced. So we're doing it. And I just want to point out Bill Plappinger, who's the chairman of the board at Vassar College, is here. And they're taking the first posse, Veterans Posse. We just picked them. It's great. So we do sometimes expand.
Hi there. We have a high school where we have a program, ABC, A Better Chance, and it's been in our high school, our community, for 40 years. And we're struggling to keep that program going. I mean, we continue to work through that program, but I'm very disappointed that a lot of other high schools are not adopting programs like that. So it's, so there are programs out there for high school students, and we have 6 scholars. It's a small high school, but 6 ABC scholars, and they shine. They shine. So there are opportunities in high school.
Yeah. Anyone else? One more question. So all 2 more questions.
Okay, we've got one more question. Is how do you, if you could talk about scale, Professor from Brandeis mentioned that, if you could talk about scale, how do we reach the 90% of students or 70%, whatever that is, that we're actually not reaching? And if we're students, some of us that are interested in college access, how can we think about that in terms of the numbers that we're not reaching?
Well, I happen to know you have some good ideas already. He's like, yeah, I do. You just got to make them happen. How could I answer that question, right? You got to make it happen. You got to make it happen. Support the young person you believe in. Give money to the organization you believe in. If you have an idea, go out and see if it's possible. Talk to people, pressure people, write to your congressman, vote. All of these things that seem so obvious, you know, yes. I don't have a better answer because I know you're going to change. I know. I talked to this guy yesterday. He's got a great idea, which I won't reveal, through the entrepreneurship course here at Harvard, where they're all coming up with these really cool ideas, but you got to go make them happen.
Hi. So it sounds that the Posse scholars, as compared to students who might have been average or might have been evaluated on some of the more quote unquote traditional assessments, are significantly outperforming, whether it's GPA, graduation rates, resilience, leadership on the campus. And so what I'm curious about is at the K12 level, like particularly a secondary school, if you were going to create a high school that would prepare kids to excel at the kinds of things that Posse looks for, right? So I'm trying to pull it back down in. What kinds of, because we're privileging certain kinds of learning and certain kinds of assessment.
That's a good way of putting it. Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious about what's if you had your druthers and could imagine what a high school would look like that would prepare kids to excel in that way, what kinds of learning experiences would be happening in there? What would we be giving kids the opportunity to engage in that would prepare them to then excel in those next kinds of ways?
It's such a hard question. I can't answer it. I'm not a K through 12 expert. All I can say is if you wanted to, in addition to the curriculum that K through 12 schools have, which is, there's a lot of good curriculum out there, I would include, this is what I would include, talking about issues that are hard to talk about, dialoguing, using catalytic activities to get small groups of kids to talk about race, gender, sex, equality, inequality, you know, every ism you could think of, to talk about politics and religion. What about combining those issues? Let's talk about the politics of religion. And we don't do that in our schools, not as much as we should be doing. And we should get them comfortable talking about those issues so that in addition to learning math and science and reading, they're doing that. So that by the time they get to high school and college, they're raising their hands. They're not afraid to raise their hands. They're challenging the professor. They don't think their idea is stupid or I sound weird or anything like that. They're used to talking about it. The college kids we meet are not used to talking about those things. And if I had to pick one thing, it would be that. Thank you, everybody, so much.
There's just one thing left to do. I'm proud to present the Ann Rowe Award to Deborah Bial, Ed.M. 96, Ed.D. 2004, in recognition of her many contributions in the field of education to women's professional growth through providing a model of leadership and excellence to women, breaking down traditional stereotypes, expectations for men and women, empowering women to help themselves, and making significant contributions to the local community, education, profession, and nation. Here you go. Thank you.